Let me tell you a story. A few years ago, I met a young entrepreneur who had just started his second company. The first one had failed, spectacularly, lost funding, lost partners, and for a while he told me he lost himself. But this time, he was doing it differently. I asked him why he got back up after the first failure. He smiled and said, because the mission didn't fail, just the first try did. That stuck with me. You see, most people think quitting is about weakness. But it's not. Quitting is seductive. It offers instant relief. It tells you you've suffered enough. You've done all you can. It makes you believe the pain will go away if you just stop. But purpose doesn't let you stop. Not for long. When we commit to something bigger than ourselves, a vision, a mission, a belief, quitting stops being about failure and starts being about alignment. The only time it's okay to quit is when you've realized the thing you're chasing doesn't matter to you anymore. But if it does, if it still burns in you, then quitting is just the detour that takes you further from who you're meant to be. Let's be honest. Persistence isn't glamorous. It's not the Instagram post. It's not the TD Talk moment. Persistence is quiet. It's 4 a.m. coffees. It's sending another email after no response. It's showing up when you feel invisible. It's trying again. Knowing it might not work, but believing that one day it might. The greatest among us didn't get there because they never failed. They got there because they refused to let failure define them. So when you feel like quitting, ask yourself, are you tired or have you lost your reason? Because if you're just tired, rest. Don't quit. If you're scared, get still. Don't quit. And if you're lost, go back to your why. Your why will always pull you forward, even when everything else is pushing against you. We live in a world obsessed with outcomes, but the people who change the world are obsessed with process, with growth, with becoming. And the only way you become anything of value is by not quitting. So no, don't quit. Not on the vision, not on the mission, and above all, not on yourself. We often talk about grit, resilience, and perseverance as if they are things that only the strongest people have. But the truth is, every one of us faces moments where quitting seems like the only reasonable choice. When we're overwhelmed, underappreciated, or exhausted, quitting whispers to us. It promises relief. It promises peace. It tells us you've done enough. And sometimes that voice is persuasive enough to make us stop. But here's the key. Quitting doesn't always come from weakness. Sometimes it comes from a deep need to avoid pain. It's a survival mechanism. It's natural, but so is growth. And growth rarely happens without discomfort. The problem is, we often mistake discomfort for a sign to give up, when in fact, it's just the price of transformation. What separates those who move forward from those who don't isn't talent. It's not even luck. It's clarity of purpose. Purpose is the reason we started in the first place. It's the fuel. It's the thing that made the risk seem worth it. The problem is, in the middle of struggle, we forget. The mission gets blurry. The hard days pile up. We start focusing only on outcomes, on results, on milestones we haven't yet reached. And when we can't see the progress we want, we assume it's because we're failing. But progress doesn't always look like movement. Sometimes it looks like standing still in a storm and refusing to be pushed back. When we have a clear purpose, we have a reason to keep going even when everything around us says stop. Because purpose is not tied to circumstances. It's not dependent on how good we feel today, or whether we got applause yesterday. Purpose lies beneath all that. It's deeper. And when we can stay connected to it, it changes how we interpret difficulty. Challenges stop being obstacles and start becoming tests of alignment. We ask ourselves, does this hardship mean I should stop? Or is this the fire that proves I still care? The irony is that the bigger the purpose, the more resistance we're likely to face. We're not challenged when we're on paths of least resistance. We're challenged when we're on a path that matters. That's where fear lives. That's where doubt grows, because the stakes are higher. But purpose has a strange way of clarifying things when everything else is blurry. It doesn't necessarily make the path easier, but it makes the struggle meaningful. It gives us a reason to carry weight we wouldn't normally carry. It allows us to say, "This hurts, but it's worth it." There's a reason stories of resilience are so inspiring. It's not just that people survived tough things. It's that they survived because they believed in something greater than the pain. They had something they weren't willing to give up on. That's what purpose does. It creates non-negotiables. It defines our boundaries. It helps us choose our battles because when you know what matters, you also learn what doesn't. Without purpose, effort feels wasted. With purpose, even failure feels valuable. We often confuse the feeling of being stuck with the idea that we're on the wrong path. But sometimes we're just on the right path at the hardest part. And this is where purpose becomes essential. It's what reminds us why we started when the road ahead looks endless. It's also what helps us reframe failure. When purpose is your anchor, you don't judge your journey by individual outcomes. You judge it by commitment. You stop asking, "Did I win?" and start asking, "Did I stay aligned?" There's something powerful about staying aligned with a purpose when it would be easier to let go. Because that alignment, that devotion to something bigger than the current moment, is what builds strength. Not just external success, but internal stability. And people feel that. They sense when someone isn't just chasing goals, but living out something they truly believe in. The truth is, we live in a culture that glorifies speed. Fast growth, fast success, fast change, but purpose is slow. It's patient. It's not looking for the fastest route. It's looking for the most meaningful one. That's why quitting is so tempting in a fast world. Because fast gives us dopamine. Purpose gives us depth, and depth takes time. When we're driven by purpose, we become more than reactive. We become intentional. We stop quitting because things are hard, and start asking whether the hard things are still part of what we believe in. And this mindset creates sustainability. Because if we only keep going when things are going well, we'll burn out. But if we keep going because we believe in the thing itself, then even when it's hard, we can endure. People who don't quit aren't superhuman. They're just clear. They remember why they're here. They revisit that memory often. They remind themselves that the pain is not the point. The mission is. And as long as the mission remains, so does the will to try again. This doesn't mean we never pivot. It doesn't mean we stubbornly cling to broken systems or unhealthy routines. But even the pivot should be purposeful. We can change how we do things, but if the why stays the same, then it's not quitting. It's adapting. That's the difference. Quitting is walking away from the reason. Adapting is changing the method. Purpose allows you to do the second without falling into the first. There's a discipline to this, a practice. We have to remind ourselves daily, sometimes hourly, why we do what we do, because life has a way of distracting us, of drowning out the voice of purpose with the noise of urgency. But urgency is temporary. Purpose is enduring. So when quitting feels like the only logical choice, pause, go back to the beginning. Remember what moved you to start. Reconnect with the part of you that was willing to risk, to believe, to try. That version of you still exists. They're just buried under fatigue, disappointment, and pressure. Dig them out, let them speak, and if what they wanted still matters to you, then don't quit, not yet. Not because it's hard. Hard is part of the path. Let hard teach you something. Let it shape you. Let it refine the edges of your ego and polish the core of your commitment. Every meaningful pursuit will ask you the same question. Do you still want this even when it's not working? That question is a doorway. Most people walk away, some walk through, not because they're brave every day, but because they know what they're walking toward. Persistence is one of those words that sounds noble when we hear it, but in practice, it's often uncomfortable, lonely, and unseen. It's not the thing people celebrate in the moment. It's not the flash of brilliance, the loud achievement, or the viral moment. Persistence lives in the background. It shows up in the quiet, repetitive, unglamorous choices we make when no one's watching. And that's what makes it so powerful. When people talk about success, they often highlight breakthroughs, moments when everything changes. But what they rarely talk about are the dozens, maybe hundreds, of times before that moment when someone showed up without recognition, without applause, and did the work anyway. That's persistence. It's not about motivation. It's about discipline. It's the willingness to act even when motivation has left the room. We're conditioned to admire the highlight reel, the podium, the award speech, the end result. But we forget that all of those outcomes were built on top of days filled with uncertainty, boredom, doubt, and rejection. Persistence lives in those days. In fact, it thrives there because it's not sustained by external rewards. It's fueled by internal conviction. You wake up early to do something that didn't work yesterday, knowing it still might not work today. You go to the gym even when the scale hasn't moved in weeks. You keep calling leads who don't answer. You keep writing code that might crash. You keep teaching students who don't seem to care. You keep practicing lines to an audience of 0. That's persistence, and it rarely feels good in the moment. There's a myth that says people who keep going are naturally tougher, naturally more confident, or more optimistic. But that's not it. People who persist simply learn to tolerate the silence. They've built a relationship with discomfort. They've stopped relying on feeling good to keep going. Instead, they rely on clarity, routine, and the knowledge that consistency over time builds outcomes that intensity alone never can. Persistence also asks you to be okay with being misunderstood. When you're pushing through failure after failure, people will wonder why you keep trying. They'll question your decisions. They'll suggest easier paths. And if you don't have a strong sense of why you're doing what you're doing, it's easy to start agreeing with them. But the ones who persist long enough learn that other people's understanding is not required for progress. It's a bonus, not a condition. The truth is, persistence can look a lot like foolishness from the outside. It doesn't always have visible progress to show. There's no certainty, no guarantee. You can give your all and still fail. You can work the process perfectly and still not see the result right away. And that's why persistence is so rare. Because it requires you to keep showing up without knowing when, or if, the payoff will come. That kind of patience is hard to sell. It's not exciting. You can't build a marketing campaign around someone sitting at a desk for 3 years working on a project that no one sees. But that's the reality for many of the most meaningful accomplishments. They are forged in repetition, in quiet commitment, in resilience that never announces itself. And in those moments, the only thing you really have is your process. Not the result, not the approval, just the process. That's why process-driven people tend to outlast others, because they find satisfaction in the doing, not just in the done. They don't need every day to be a win. They just need every day to be a step. You see this in artists who paint for years before their work is noticed, in athletes who train every day knowing that most people will only ever see them compete for a few minutes, in scientists who spend decades on research that might never make headlines. They all understand the truth that persistence is about identity, not just effort. It's who you are when no one is clapping. And the thing is, persistence is cumulative. Every time you choose to stay in the game, you're compounding your chances of breakthrough. It's like drops of water against stone. No single drop is powerful enough to make a difference, but over time, the stone changes. Not because of force, but because of consistency. This doesn't mean you won't feel like quitting. You will, often. In fact, feeling like quitting is almost a sign that you're on the right track. It means you're doing something that matters enough to test your limits. It means you're stretching. Growth rarely happens in your comfort zone, and persistence is what keeps you in the stretch zone long enough for transformation to occur. But in that stretch, don't expect constant validation. That's where most people get discouraged. They think if they keep going, They'll feel more confident or see more results or get more recognition. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. Persistence isn't about certainty. It's about choosing the path despite uncertainty. It's also about redefining what progress looks like. Some days, progress is moving the needle. Other days, it's just not moving backward. Some days, persistence looks like writing 1,000 words. Other days, it's just opening the laptop. And that's okay, because consistency isn't perfection. It's presence. There will be days when your best effort is showing up tired, doing what you can and not quitting. And those days count. They might even count more than the days when everything goes well. Because it's in the struggle that your character is shaped. Your resolve is tested, and your commitment is proven. In fact, the most transformative aspect of persistence isn't what you get at the end, it's who you become along the way. The person who shows up despite doubt. The one who doesn't wait for ideal conditions. The one who knows how to work in the dark. That person is forged in the repetition, not in the reward. That's why persistence is such a powerful force. It doesn't just lead to external success. It leads to internal mastery. You learn how to trust yourself, how to navigate disappointment, how to adapt, how to endure. And those are the qualities that make success sustainable, not just achievable, even when no one is watching. Even when no one says thank you, even when there's no visible progress, you show up again and again and again. That is the essence of persistence, not loud, not glamorous, just consistent, just steady, just strong. There's a fundamental difference between being tired and being done. Many people confuse the two. When exhaustion sets in, when motivation disappears, when the weight of effort feels unbearable, the first instinct is to quit. But what if the issue isn't that you need to give up? What if you simply need to rest? In a world that celebrates hustle and glorifies overworking, rest is often treated like weakness. It's seen as something you earn only after success. But rest is not a reward, it's a requirement. It's the reset that allows you to show up again. Without it, even the most passionate purpose starts to feel like a burden. When people talk about perseverance, they often forget that the fuel behind it isn't endless energy, it's strategic renewal. You can't persist if you're depleted. You can't stay committed if you're constantly running on empty. Your body will shut down. Your mind will rebel. Your creativity will vanish. That's not a sign that you're on the wrong path. That's your system calling for recovery. We all hit walls. The question is not whether the wall will come. The question is what we do when we meet it. Some try to crash through it. Some turn around. But the ones who last, the ones who keep building something meaningful, are the ones who pause, breathe, recalibrate, and find a way around. They rest. Not because they're giving up, but because they intend to keep going. Rest gives you clarity. When you're exhausted, everything feels heavier than it is. Problems look bigger. Criticism stings more. Setbacks seem final. It's not that your situation has changed. It's that your capacity to see clearly has shrunk. Fatigue distorts perspective. It whispers lies like you're not cut out for this, or you're wasting your time. But those aren't truths. They're symptoms of depletion. And if you respond to them by quitting, you may walk away from something that was never broken. Only pause. We don't often hear about the quiet moments in people's journeys. The weeks when they disappear to take care of themselves, to regain their center, to get grounded again. Those parts don't make headlines, but they're often the turning points. Because rest doesn't just restore energy, it restores vision. It reminds you why you started. It separates the noise of burnout from the voice of purpose. Think of it like an athlete in training. No one expects them to train non-stop without rest days. In fact, rest days are part of the plan. They're the time the body uses to grow stronger, to repair tears, to rebuild capacity. Without them, the body breaks down. Why would we assume it's different for our minds, our emotions, or our purpose? There's also a cultural narrative that says, push through no matter what. While that mindset can be useful in moments of short-term urgency, It's toxic over the long term. It encourages people to ignore signals from their own well-being. It trains them to override exhaustion, to suppress their needs, to view recovery as a distraction instead of an investment. But there's a cost to that. Burnout, resentment, loss of joy. You may keep moving, but you stop growing. You stop feeling. You become mechanical, detached from the reason you ever cared in the first place. People who stay in the game for years, who keep creating, who keep serving, who keep leading, they understand that rest is strategic. It's not optional. It's part of the rhythm. It's not a retreat from the mission. It's what sustains the mission. When done intentionally, rest is an act of responsibility. It says, I care enough about this work that I'm going to take care of the person doing it. Rest also creates space for insight. When you stop running, even for a moment, ideas start to resurface. Solutions you couldn't see when you were buried in effort start to emerge. Emotions you pushed aside start to speak again. You begin to reconnect with your own intuition, and that inner alignment is far more valuable than any metric of productivity. But resting doesn't mean stopping forever. It doesn't mean abandoning the work. It doesn't mean the mission has changed. It means you're listening. It means you're respecting your limits so you can return stronger, clearer, more grounded. It's a temporary pause, not a permanent end. The danger of not resting is that everything starts to feel like a reason to quit. Fatigue makes doubt louder. It makes fear more convincing. It erodes confidence. You begin to question your path, not because the path is wrong, but because you no longer have the energy to walk it well. In that state, quitting feels rational. It feels like relief, but the real relief often comes not from quitting, but from sleeping, from stepping back, from giving yourself permission to exhale. And it's not just about sleep. Rest can take many forms: silence, time in nature, deep conversation, art, journaling, laughter, stillness. Whatever reconnects you to yourself, that's rest. Whatever helps you hear your own voice again, that's rest. It doesn't have to be long, it just has to be honest. Some people fear that if they rest, they'll lose momentum. They think stepping back means falling behind, but it's the opposite. When you rest well, you come back faster, sharper, more creative, more effective. You stop spinning your wheels, you move with intention. You stop chasing outcomes and start creating from a place of alignment. That's real momentum. Rest also reconnects you with joy, and joy is not a distraction from meaningful work, it's fuel for it. When you find yourself dreading every step, dragging yourself through the motions, it's often because you haven't let yourself breathe. You haven't made space for delight, for wonder, for peace, and those are the things that remind you why the work matters in the first place. There's wisdom in knowing when to push and when to pause. Not every hard moment requires more effort. Sometimes it requires less noise, less doing, more being, more reflection, more presence. It's in these quiet moments that many people rediscover their purpose. They remember the version of themselves that started this journey. Not the tired version, not the overwhelmed one, but the one full of hope and conviction. That version still exists. It's just waiting for you beneath the exhaustion. The world doesn't need more burn, doubt, resentful people dragging themselves through meaningful work. It needs more people who know how to take care of themselves in the process, who know how to sustain their passion without losing their soul, who understand that persistence isn't about constant motion. It's about enduring commitment, and commitment is best sustained by rhythms of work and rest, effort and renewal, striving and surrender. You don't have to prove your dedication by pushing through everything. You prove it by showing up over the long haul, and showing up for the long haul means learning to rest without guilt, without shame, without labeling it as failure. Rest is part of the discipline. It's part of the craft. It's part of what allows you to begin again tomorrow with clear eyes, steady hands, and an open heart. Courage isn't always loud. It's not always the bold declaration or the heroic leap. Sometimes courage is much quieter. Sometimes it's just taking one more step when everything in you wants to stop. Sometimes it's choosing to show up again after a failure. Sometimes it's admitting that you're scared but deciding to act anyway. That kind of courage doesn't make headlines, but it changes lives. It builds legacies. It defines people in the moments that matter most. We tend to think of courage as something reserved for the battlefield, for crisis, for the extraordinary. But the truth is, courage shows up in everyday decisions. It shows up when you choose to have a hard conversation instead of avoiding it. It shows up when you take responsibility for your mistakes instead of blaming someone else. It shows up when you take the first step without knowing how the story ends. That's what makes courage so powerful. It doesn't need certainty to act. In moments of doubt, when fear creeps in and questions start flooding your mind, am I good enough? What if I fail? What if they reject me? What if I'm wasting my time? It's easy to shrink back, easy to wait. Easy to hope someone else will take the lead, but courage is the refusal to let fear be the final decision maker. Courage says, yes, this might go wrong, and I'm still doing it. It's not the absence of fear, it's the decision to move forward with fear in your pocket. Courage is uncomfortable. It stretches you, it exposes you, it makes you vulnerable because it forces you to confront the unknown. There's no guarantee that acting with courage will result in immediate success. In fact, sometimes courage just leads to another challenge, but the reward isn't always in the outcome, it's in what it awakens within you. Every act of courage reinforces your belief in yourself. It reminds you that you can do hard things, that fear doesn't have to win, that you're not at the mercy of circumstance. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is simply keep believing. Keep believing in your work, your values, your vision, even when there's no evidence that it's working. That kind of courage, the courage to believe when belief feels foolish, is what separates the ones who make it from the ones who give up too soon. Because there will be times when belief is the only thing you're holding on to. Not results, not recognition, just belief. That's not naive. That's brave. Courage also means being willing to be seen, to be visible in your pursuit of something meaningful, knowing full well that others might not understand. They might judge, they might criticize, and still you move forward. Still, you put yourself in the arena, because deep down you know that hiding will never lead to fulfillment. Only courage gives you access to the life you're truly capable of living. But courage doesn't mean reckless risk. It doesn't mean ignoring fear, it means listening to it, learning from it, but not letting it drive. Fear is information. It tells you where the stakes are, but it doesn't tell you what's possible. Only courage has that power. Courage sees the same obstacles fear sees, but responds with hope instead of hesitation. One of the greatest acts of courage is continuing to pursue something when no one else believes in it. When the applause has stopped, when the momentum has faded, when all the feedback is telling you to quit. Courage is what allows you to keep going in the dark, to keep building, to keep creating, to keep trying, knowing that failure is possible, but choosing to rise anyway. It also takes courage to change course when something isn't right. Staying stuck in the wrong situation often feels safer than stepping into the unknown. But courage says, this is no longer serving me, and I'm willing to walk away, even if I don't yet know what's next. That kind of decision requires a deep trust in yourself. It means valuing your future enough to let go of what's comfortable. Another form of courage is telling the truth, not just to others, but to yourself. Being honest about what you want, what you need, what hurts, what isn't working. That kind of honesty is the foundation of any meaningful transformation. You can't change what you're not willing to face. And facing it takes courage. It means tearing down the walls you built to protect yourself and letting in the possibility of growth, even when it hurts. There's also courage in asking for help, in saying, I don't have this figured out, in reaching out instead of isolating. We often associate courage with independence, but the truth is, it takes more strength to admit your need for others than it does to pretend you're fine. Vulnerability isn't weakness. It's a form of strength that builds connection, empathy, and resilience. Courage shows up in leadership, in choosing what's right over what's popular, in standing up for people who don't have a voice, in making decisions that serve the greater good even when they come with personal cost. Leadership without courage is shallow. It chases approval, not impact. But courageous leadership changes cultures. It inspires people to be bold themselves, because when someone sees you step up with integrity, it gives them permission to do the same. We often overestimate how much courage it takes to begin and underestimate how much it takes to continue. Starting something new is a visible act of bravery, but sticking with it, through doubt, through fear, through failure, that's where real courage lies. It lives in the ordinary grind, in the quiet decision to try again, in the steady, stubborn refusal to quit. There's no perfect moment for courage, no special signal that says, now is the time. Most of the time, courage feels inconvenient. It interrupts your comfort. It calls you to a higher version of yourself when you'd rather stay where you are. But every time you answer that call, something inside you shifts. You begin to trust your instincts more. You begin to believe in your capacity to face the unknown. You realize that courage isn't a single act, it's a lifestyle, and once you start living that way, fear starts to lose its grip. It doesn't disappear, but it gets quieter. Because you've proven to yourself that you can keep moving forward even when you're afraid. You stop waiting to feel brave, and you start acting brave, and the more you act brave, the more your identity shifts. You're no longer just someone who wishes. They're someone who does, someone who tries, someone who dares. The most courageous people aren't the loudest in the room. They're the ones who live in alignment, who take small, consistent risks in service of something greater, who are willing to look foolish, to fall short, to begin again. They understand that courage is less about what you do and more about what you believe, that what you're building, who you're becoming, and why you started still matter, and that those things are worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth pursuing with everything you've got, even when it's hard, even when it's quiet, even when it's terrifying.